Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a Q&A episode, and I have three questions I want to dive into. But first, before I do that, I just want to go over a few ways you can help support the podcast. So first, if you had found this podcast to be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, and that will help more people find this podcast. I want to continue to grow it. And if people obviously see that people enjoy it, more people are likely to listen and give it a shot. So appreciate everybody who listens to this podcast. Next, I have my free masterclass on body recomp, what it is, how to do it. The link to that is in the show notes. I also have my free masterclass on nutrition periodization, go over each nutrition phase, how to do it, how to set it up, common mistakes, adjustments you need to make, anything and everything you need to know about each nutrition phase. And the link to that is in the show notes. And then lastly, if you haven't yet, give me a follow on Instagram, Jeff, HOEHN _. And that's where I'm most active on social media. If you have any questions on this podcast, anything that didn't make sense, anything that you need me to, maybe clarify for you, that would be the best place to reach out. And if you just have any general questions, not about the podcast, that also would be the best place as well. So with that out of the way, let's dive into today's question. So the first question I have is, what have been some of your biggest nutrition hurdles? How did you overcome them? I thought this was a really good question. Haven't really thought about this. For me, growing up, love my parents. They're great, took great care of me, but we didn't have the greatest nutrition habits for sure. And so I think, as do many people in today's world, again, drank a ton of soda, just really into snacking, chips, really into snack foods. I wasn't somebody who was picky. I really enjoyed eating anything and everything. So I never was picky. My mom always did cook us meals, but there's those times where, again, maybe just I relied on snacking a little bit too much. I mean, again, it just came more so from preference, right? So nothing against them or anything like that. But definitely probably one of the big things there is just didn't have the greatest nutrition habits growing up. And I think you have to work around that. That's ingrained. So let's fast forward a little bit though. And I think for me, some of the biggest nutrition habits are one, enjoying. I do enjoy tasty food. So sometimes like it can be really hard to moderate them. And by having these really tasty foods, it's really tough it's just really hard to moderate them. And it can add in a lot of extra calories. So for me, this is something that I always deal with, right? Who doesn't like food though? So this isn't like anything I feel like it's just to me, but it's more so to be like, hey, I really enjoy food and I have to moderate these things. I think a lot of times it's, oh, this is what you do, so it's easy for you. It's not. Like I still really enjoy food just like everybody else. And so moderating these can be very challenging. What are some things that have helped me moderate that? Slowing down when eating, at least paying attention to it. You can ask my wife. There's definitely times where I still eat pretty quickly. So again, this is something that I still have to work on there. But when I can, it definitely is a strategy that helps, especially when you're in environments where there's a lot of tasty food. So really slowing down, chewing that food can be super helpful. Stopping when I'm satisfied versus stuff has been super helpful as well. This is where in the past, I probably would be like, oh man, this is just tastes so good. I just got to keep eating this. I got to keep eating this. And then you eat to that point to where you're just overly stuffed and you don't feel good afterwards, but you also probably consumed way too many calories. And just understanding how the brain works has really helped me here as well, because just understanding that the tastier the food is, the quicker you want to eat it, the hungrier you are, the more you want to eat. And it takes a little bit for your brain to realize that you're getting full, and the tastier the food is, the harder this is going to be. So for me, it's consciously knowing that's the case. And so I've been able to eat less overall and cut out a lot of extra calories because of this. And this would show up more in phases where I'm out of a fat loss phase, because in a fat loss phase, I am very aware of it. And that's something that's helped me with that. But outside of a fat loss phase, you are like, I'm out of a fat loss phase. I can do anything I want. And so I know that there were periods of time where in previous building phases or phases where I was trying to gain weight, I probably ate too much because of this kind of thought process. And when Allie makes something tasty or we have events or we're out to eat, I still have to watch myself on this and make sure that I stop and don't overconsume. Also, trying to pair tasty foods with more nutrient dense foods has also been helpful. So it's okay if we're going to have something that's, again, super tasty, pairing it with a nutrient dense food. So for example, the other night we went out, got some pizza, and I got a salad with chicken in it, right? Grilled chicken. Again, it wasn't spinach or anything. It was some iceberg lettuce. So again, maybe that's not necessarily the greatest nutrient dense thing, but it is high food volume. So again, getting things like that in. Again, if we have pizza at home, I would make a big spinach salad with it. We like to have cinnamon rolls every once in a while on Sunday mornings. So pairing that with a piece of fruit and some Greek yogurt. I'm always, having these tasty foods, but I'm pairing it with something that's also going to provide me some nutrition as well. And that helps alleviate some of that potential to overeat. So that's a big one there, and some things I worked on. If I wasn't into health and fitness, I would probably barely eat any amount of protein. So making sure I build my meals around a source of protein is super helpful because again, if I didn't care about macros, I probably would not eat very much protein. Now, I guess I take that back. I would obviously eat tasty protein, again, your higher fat type of meats, but I probably wouldn't have as much fish or chicken if I wasn't into health and fitness. And again, I would probably just not have as much protein as all overall because it is fairly, you can't add up. It's probably the most expensive. So again, that would be something, another thing there where if I wasn't into it, I would definitely struggle with that. I think for me in the past, it was also just like staying consistent with nutrition. Again, I could do it for a couple days. Staying consistent with that over time was super challenging. And I think the skills I've learned and staying disciplined with it and learning more about the brain and just how we work as humans and how some of these foods, you know, how these foods are has allowed me to be more consistent to work with my body versus against it. And then cooking, I'm just not a big fan of cooking. I'm not good at it. So I tend to stick with more like really basic stuff, which outside of myself isn't very great. So not great for Allie and my future kids, but for myself, it's fine. So again, that's probably a struggle. Is just I just don't enjoy cooking. I would rather just not have to worry about it. Again, it can sometimes be therapeutic to do some cooking, but for the most part, it's not. And I don't enjoy doing it. So again, I would say that's some sort of nutrition hurdle there. And then I guess overall now too with nutrition is I just go off of how I feel. I know which foods sit well with me. I know the amounts as well too. And it's all about how I feel versus, yes, I want to have tasty foods, but know that certain tasty foods aren't going to make me feel good. So I'm less inclined to have as much of them. So going off how I feel has been super helpful there as well. So hopefully that gave you some insight into some nutrition hurdles for myself. Next, beneficial to stay closer to maintenance when bulking if you are scared to put on body fat. So again, I think this whole being scared of putting on body fat, if done, like you're not really going to put on any body fat. So I think if that's the case, again, you need to look at your kind of methods, what you're doing, and then also the mental side of things. You either need to work with somebody on this in terms of having a coach to help guide you through this, or again, like there's something a little bit deeper that you need to get into here in terms of being scared to put on body fat. Again, that's something that you need to look into here. But also, like I said, I think we just need to understand that if done, like we're really going to limit the amount of body fat we put on. So really at that point, you'd have to just weigh the pros and cons. Is me adding more muscle more important or is me having less body fat more important? And then it's just a trade-off at that point. And so you have to decide that. Now, in saying that, I want to dive into this a little bit more, but that's my overarching, like, if you're scared to put on body fat, again, like those are like, again, you have to weigh that out there. And again, you look at your methods. Also, if it's something deeper than that, you said, is it something you need to talk to a therapist about? Again, is it something deeper than that? Is it just maybe your expectations of how much body fat you're going to put on? And then obviously your goals in terms of what's most important. Because I do think that you can stay at maintenance when you're trying to build muscle, but there's some things that we need to look at here first. So again, is it beneficial to stay closer to maintenance when trying to build muscle? This is going to depend on your current body fat levels, muscle mass, and overall muscle building goals. So first, if your body fat levels are higher, you can probably get away with being at maintenance to build muscle. And we know that you can probably be in a small deficit to build muscle, the higher your body fat levels are. Somebody will ask what's considered higher body fat levels. I don't want you to get caught up in exact numbers here because I think this, for one, there's no good way to figure out what your exact body fat percentage is. So there's that. And then it's not like a hard cutoff of, oh, hey, when you're at this number, then you shouldn't. But again, we just need to think of it as leaner you are, the less you're going to benefit from being at, you probably need to be more in a surplus. The less leaner you are, the higher body fat percentage you are at, the more you'll benefit from being at maintenance or a small deficit to muscle and to improve your overall body composition. The biggest thing here is, so why is this? So if your body fat levels are higher, again, what's at play here? Again, when we have higher body fat levels, it's a couple things. One, we have these extra energy reserves on our body to where it's like you don't need to be in a surplus. You can utilize those extra energy reserves, like kind of is essentially you being in a small surplus. From an overall health perspective, overall look perspective, if you're at a certain body fat percentage, it's a little bit on the higher side. You're not lean, and you keep adding more body fat, it's like your overall physique isn't going to be great. And then that's going to lead to you thinking that this stuff doesn't work and you're going to get demotivated. And so that's the big reason why we want to make sure that your body fat levels are in a good spot. But again, another thing that we need to also look at here too is your overall muscle mass. The leaner you are, the more muscle you have, you're not going to benefit from being able to, you're not going to be able to build more muscle at maintenance or in a deficit. You need to get into a surplus. So again, your muscle mass is going to play a huge role in this. Also, we need to take into consideration your muscle gain goals. If you're somebody who you really want to build as much muscle as possible, at some point you're going to have to get over this hurdle. If you're someone who's, I don't need to be I don't need to have a ton of muscle, but I do want to have some definition, then maybe you can get away with being closer to maintenance to build muscle. You need to take into consideration your goals. So just to like sum this up, if you're on the leaner side, have a lot of muscle and have lofty muscle gain goals, then you're going to need or will need to be in a surplus at some point in time. And again, you'll have to break through that hurdle of scared of gaining body fat. And then there's everything in between, right? And then on the other far side would be, hey, you're higher body fat levels, you don't have a lot of muscle currently, and you're not trying to be jacked or anything like that. You can definitely get away with maintenance or again, a small deficit to build muscle. Okay. And then again, there's everything in between who is maybe moderate body fat, moderate amounts of muscle, have moderate muscle gain goals. Again, you could probably get away with being closer to your maintenance in your building phases. Again, there's everything that falls in between there. But I think looking at both ends of the spectrum was super helpful. And then again, there's everything in between. As I've stated before, a lot of people can get away with being closer to maintenance for a period of time or forever, depending on these things when it comes to muscle growth. I definitely think that you can be at maintenance, but again, you have to just weigh in your current body composition and your goals. And also, let's take this into consideration. And this again comes back to your muscle gain goals. Like, what are your overall muscle gain goals? But at the end of the day, you can build some muscle in a calorie deficit. Again, there's certain circumstances and situations where it can happen. Higher body fat percentages, new to weight training. Those are the main ones, low levels of muscle coming off an injury. These are situations where you can. However, no matter what, being, again, the smaller the deficit is, the better you're going to be here in terms of adding muscle. But no matter what, being in a calorie deficit is going to be inferior to being at maintenance or a surplus for building muscle. But we can take it even a step further. Again, being at maintenance, calories, energy balance is going to be better than being in a deficit to build muscle. However, even further, being in a calorie surplus is going to be better than maintenance for building muscle. So again, this is where your overall goal is the most important. And so, like I said, if you do have these kind of lofty muscle gain goals, you're probably going to need to be in a surplus at some point in time to build muscle. But I bring this up because again, people will get this twisted and think that, oh, so you're saying that I just need to be in a deficit and I can build muscle. Again, it's always it's not going to be as good as being at maintenance or a surplus, but even maintenance is not going to be as good as being in a surplus at a certain point. And again, this all comes down to goals and where you want to go, current body composition, et cetera. So that's how I feel about that. And hopefully that gives you some more insight. So now I want to just quickly go into, okay, so how can we, let's say you're like, all right, I'm on the leaner side, I have a decent amount of muscle, I want to keep building more, and you have pretty lofty muscle gain goals. Or maybe you do have lofty muscle gain goals and you're like, hey, I do want to be in a surplus. I'm okay if I'm a little bit, my body fat's a little bit higher. All right, so what do we do to make sure that we're maximizing the amount of muscle for each pound that we're putting on, that we're maximizing the amount of muscle that we are compared to body fat? Because again, if we're going to be in a calorie surplus, there's going to be some fat gain. It's not feasible to expect 100% of it to be muscle. Some of it's going to be fat gain. So how can we make sure that most of that weight that we're gaining is muscle? The first is avoid gaining weight too quickly. We want to have this small to moderate calorie surplus. Think about 1% of body weight per month would be where I would go. So again, we want to make sure that weight gain is small as possible per week. We don't want the quicker we go, if you go north of that 1% body weight per week, just understand that now you're going to start to shift more of that weight you gain towards fat gain versus muscle gain. This doesn't mean that if you go 1.1%, oh crap, you just gained a ton of body fat. No, it's again, the further away you get from that, the more fat you can expect in this process. So again, we want to make sure we're not gaining weight too quickly. This is where I've run into issues in the past for myself is I knew I needed to gain weight to build more muscle. I heard you need to be in a surplus. So then it was like every time I got on the scale, I needed to see that weight go up. And this just led to me gaining weight too quickly. And I probably put on more body fat than I need to. I built muscle, but I put on more body fat than I needed to. And that's going to show up as, oh, I'm just gaining body fat. I'm not gaining any muscle. This doesn't work. I need to cut again. And then you leads to this kind of vicious cycle there. That's the first thing. Next, we want to make sure we're pushing our training. We need to make sure we're weight training, obviously, which again, I think if you have lofty muscle gain goals, you know that. But we want to make sure we're pushing our training. We want to make sure we're overloading and it's consistent effort. We're not just going into the gym and just winging it every time. We want to make sure we're pushing ourselves over time and we have that consistent effort. It's probably a good idea to keep your overall activity levels up. This kind of goes back into avoid gaining too quickly. I think if you're very sedentary, it's going to be easier for you to get into a higher calorie surplus. So we want to make sure that we keep our overall activity levels up. Plus, staying active is going to be great from a insulin sensitivity standpoint. You're going to give your body more options to continue to utilize the nutrients into the muscle and just to utilize it more effectively. Plus, it can help manage hunger, which can help ensure that you're not another thing that's going to help you not gain weight too quickly because you're not going to get into that calorie surplus. So we want to make sure we keep our overall activity levels up as well too. Next, sleep's going to be super important. If sleep is poor, you're probably going to partition more of this weight towards body fat, or this excess calories towards body fat versus muscle mass. So again, sleep is super important as well too. We want to make sure sleep is there. Next, we want to make sure we're eating enough protein overall. Again, I think around 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of body weight is perfect for that. So again, making sure you have enough protein. We could be in that calorie surplus, but if you're having 0.4 grams per pound of body weight protein, you're going to probably be hurting muscle growth at least a little bit. Again, the main thing is that you're weight training, because that's going to actually send that signal to build muscle. But if we're under eating protein, we probably are going to hurt that process. It's something where, on it one day, it's like, it's not going to be a big deal. You do that for 3 months on end. Okay. It's probably going to start to add up. Again, we want to make sure we manage our overall stress load. Is this going to be something that can help mitigate fat gain and make sure that more of the weight we gain is going towards muscle growth? So again, making sure you manage your stress in healthy ways, and just find ways to reduce kind of unnecessary stressors. Certain meal timing strategies, trying to bias a little bit more of your calories towards earlier in the day and maybe avoid eating like really large meals right before bed. That would be the big thing I would say there in terms of meal timing strategies. And then just avoid days where you're like really low in calories and then you have days where you're really high in calories. And you would just probably want to avoid those days where you're in just a massive surplus, right? So again, like making sure that you're not like kind of calorie cycling to the extreme. It's okay if you have a couple days where maybe you're closer to maintenance and then a few days that are a little bit higher, but I think you're definitely going to shoot yourself in the foot if you have these like really low calorie days and then really high calorie days. This is where I think a lot of people who have trouble gaining weight do get themselves into trouble. They eat like really heavy one day, like they have smashed like 2 pizzas, they get a ton of calories, and then the next 3 days they're in a deficit. That's not what we would want to do. In that process. So if you do these things, it's like you're barely going to gain any body fat in this process. But you're going to really be maximizing muscle growth. And then, you run a cut at that point if you did gain any little bit of body fat. So hopefully that gives you some insight there in terms of if it's beneficial to stay closer to maintenance. You should have an idea of, okay, where's my body fat percentage at, where I'm at there. But then also if you decide you want to go into a surplus, you now have the tools to know how to mitigate that as well too. Another question that kind of comes off that, because I posted this on my stories, like what is considered higher body fat levels? This is hard to say. Like I said, we want it to be more based off of feel. Again, we don't want to get caught up in exact numbers. It's more just, okay, the leaner you are, the more you need to be in a surplus to build muscle or at least be at maintenance, right? The higher your body fat percentage is, you have some options here to in terms of building muscle. I would say in general for men, if you're over say 15 to 20% body fat, you're probably at that point to where and it's probably better to even make this a smaller number. I think if you're 17 to 20% or higher as a male, I think you probably would benefit from being closer to maintenance versus trying to be in a surplus for building muscle. Again, your muscle gain goals are going to be the most important here. But yeah, for women, I would say probably anywhere from, if you're under, say, 25 to 27%, you're probably going to be definitely beneficial to be closer to maintenance, maybe a small surplus. If you're over that, again, you could be in a small deficit or even maintenance there. But again, this also, I want to be careful with this advice for women in particular, because hey, you need to be in a deficit too. If you're over that number, you could potentially be in a deficit. The biggest thing is we just want to avoid being in a deficit for really long periods of time, because we do want to make sure we're adequately fueled. But in that scenario, no matter what, if you're around those numbers, maintenance for your building phases is where you'd want to be there. So hopefully that answers that. And again, understand it's less about exact numbers and more about your overall look and current body, just again, the leaner you are. So this is where having a coach can be super helpful because they can decipher that for you versus what you think. All right. And then the last question of the day is advice for tapering from high to low volume. And I really don't think you need to do anything special here. So say you're doing high training volumes and then you want to drop down to low training volumes. It's like, all right, do I need to do anything special here? Where it's, okay, I need to drop sets slowly or anything like that. I really don't think you need to. I think going from high to low training volume, you can just drop it down. I think you're fine. There's a ton of research that half to one third of your, even one ninth of your training volume is going to at least maintain, right? So we have a lot of wiggle room. Plus, it's not like you just go from high to low volumes and now you're just going to lose all this muscle, right? If you're training, you're good. I think it would be important to know, okay, how exactly, what is high volume to you? What's low volume? What does that transition look like? There would be a lot of things that I'd want to ask here, but again, you really going from high to low, you don't need to do anything special. You literally can just drop your weight down. Now, if you're going from low volume to high volume, there would be things that I would want you to do, and that would be to gradually add the volume in because you don't want to go from low volumes to very high volumes in a very short period of time. That's going to increase your injury risk if you do that. So again, going from high to low volume, there's nothing special that you need to do. You literally can just do it and you're good to go. And then if you're going from low to high, you would need to gradually go up from there and slowly add sets over time and slowly add volume there. Pretty simple question, doesn't need any explanation, I feel like, other than that. So if you do have follow-ups to this, let me know. But that's it for this episode. If you guys have any questions on anything, you can reach out to me on Instagram. Also, if you are interested in figuring out what your macros need to be, how to manage your next building phase, then my free 30-minute strategy call is for you. We dive into your current goals, what's keeping you from reaching them, and how we can get you to that point. So if you're interested in that, the link to that is in the show notes. That's it for this episode, and I will chat with you next time.